As John mentioned, I represented him in the congressional election contest out of 2006. You probably didn't hear much about it. There were just a handful of stories run. And then the media went into censorship mode, complete and total blackout. Now, one of the other things the media censors from the public is how our votes are actually counted. Would anybody trust me to count all the votes in secret and just tell you who won?
No!
No, I wouldn't. I would trust nobody, but that's how the votes are counted now. They're counted in secret on computers, and no one even checks to make sure the computer counted the votes accurately. In 2006, we went door to door in a number of precincts, and we got affidavits from voters, and we came up with proof which show that in John's district and Clint Curtis's district, right here in Florida, at least 14% of the votes cast for John and cast for Clint were not counted for them. Unlike Sarasota, there wasn't a large undervote. So those votes that people cast for John didn't just disappear into an undervote. They were counted for the Republican. And that's because the votes are counted in secret. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court has said in 3 separate cases that the right to vote includes not only the right to cast the ballot, but the right to make sure your vote is counted accurately. Once again, when your vote is counted in secret, how can you know it's counted accurately? You just have to have faith in the machines, faith in the people that run them, and they don't even check to make sure the machine counted the votes accurately. That's why the people in Congress don't care what you think. That's why you've got a 1,000-page health reform proposal that basically just is a full revenue producer for the insurance industry, and that's why the single-payer alternative is rarely mentioned. Just think back to last fall. Last fall, all of a sudden they said, hey, we got to bail out all these banks. The people said, no, do not bail out the banks. Okay? 3,000 to 1 calls against bailing out the banks reported on the floor of the House by one of the members of Congress. Okay? The lowest estimate reported was 9 against the bailout for every 1 for the bailout. That's the lowest estimate. 90% against the bailout. Virtually everyone out there did not want to bail out the banks. But what did they do? They passed the legislation anyway, right before the election. Now, why did they think they could get away with that? It's because the votes are counted in secret, folks. They're counted in secret. Less than 25 members, I believe it was 23 incumbents, were defeated in 2008. 23 incumbents in Congress were defeated. Now that's amazing, isn't it? In Florida, in 2008, supposedly 15% of the people that voted for Barack Obama then went and turned around and voted for Republicans for Congress. Now, do you believe that? No! Right, that's because the votes are counted in secret. The votes are counted in secret, and when they're counted in secret and no one checks to make sure it's being counted accurately, you don't have a representative democracy anymore. What you have is a manipulated democracy, and you have an illusion of an elected government. So one of the things that any candidate that deserves your support should be talking about is restoring one of our most important rights to control our government, and that is the right to make sure your vote is counted accurately, which, once again, the U.S. Supreme Court has talked about that being part of the right to vote in 3 separate cases. Yet, the media doesn't mention how your votes are counted. The media, and even Organizations which claim to be for election reform do not mention how your votes are counted for the most part. And the few that do mention that they're counted on computers, they don't mention that the U.S. Supreme Court has said in 3 separate cases the right includes not only the cast of ballot, but the right to make sure it's counted accurately. They don't talk about this because they're part of the controlled opposition. Okay, people, you need to talk to your friends, you need to talk to your neighbors, you need to understand that only by restoring our rights to make sure our votes are counted are we going to ever have any impact on anything they do in Washington, or anything they do in Tallahassee, or even anything they do locally, because there is evidence showing local elections have been rigged, because once again the votes are counted in secret. The other big thing that people don't think about that I want to mention today, and that is another means that we were provided to use to control our government. Because the founders didn't just give us the power to throw bad representatives out of office through elections. I mean, that was one of the means. Okay, another means is the right to bear arms, so we could defend ourselves in case tyrants took over the country. But obviously the founders, they didn't want to just give us a choice between elections and violent revolution. They thought of other things. There was a right to petition for redress of grievances. Now if you ask, you do much research on that or anything, ask around, you'll be told that the right to petition for redress of grievances gives you the right to speak out to your government, to complain about problems to your government. But if that's true, why did they say we have freedom of speech? Did they say, you have freedom of speech unless you want to complain to the government, and then we have to give you this petition for redress of grievances for that? No, that's not the case. That's not what the founders meant by the right to petition for redress of grievances. The petition for redress of grievances includes the right to commence civil and criminal actions in court. There's U.S. Supreme Court cases on this, folks. Somehow or other, the media and the monopolistic educational system don't tell you about this right. In fact, if they say anything about the right, they will lie to you about the right. This right was buried during World War II while we were fighting fascism. There was a rule of criminal procedure passed that took away your right to initiate criminal charges by taking evidence of a crime down to the courthouse and saying, I want to speak to the grand jury. That is part of your right to petition for redress of grievances, which has been stolen from you. There's a Supreme Court case where Justice Joseph Bradley said, this right is of inestimable value. And without the right to present evidence of criminal conduct directly to a grand jury of citizens, you are no longer a free man. You have been branded as a slave without this right. This is a serious right, folks. This is why they can count the votes in secret and they can steal votes from John. Because when we complain about it to the appropriate authorities, what do? Nothing.
How about the House Administration Committee, what they did?
Right. They don't...
What committee?
Yeah, okay. He's mentioning how Congress handled this. I mean, once again, we filed complaints in Florida State Court. The court ignored a U.S. Supreme Court case that said it had jurisdiction to hear the contest and dismiss the contest. We filed contest before the House Committee on Administration and the House of Representatives, which once again in 2007, this is a 2006 election, we're contesting this in 2007, it's a democratically controlled Congress, and they ignored the law to sweep it under the rug. Evidence that votes had been stolen from Democrats, they swept under the rug. Now actually that's against the law, and I have sent a letter to them and pointed out that if they didn't want to follow the law there, then I was going to file suit in federal court in Washington, D.C., seeking an injunction requiring Congress to follow the law. Okay, but that was swept under the rug. Complaint showing the evidence, once again, to the appropriate authorities that should have instituted a criminal investigation, they did nothing with. And once again, that's because our right to walk in and present evidence of criminal conduct to a grand jury has been stolen from us. Now, we've heard Abraham Lincoln famously said, we're a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Now, if you've read the Constitution, you see in the Constitution that they specifically say that we cannot have titles of nobility in our country. Now, they call people czars and stuff, but I'm not really going there with that. But if you've read history, you've probably heard that there was a movement among some of the people right after the Revolutionary War to have George Washington become king and establish a new monarchy, just like a European monarchy, with Washington as king and princes and barons and such. But unfortunately, the majority of the founders said, no, we want a government where the people's rights are respected. Now, do you think they would have said, but you know what we're going to do? We're going to make people beg a prosecuting prince to take action when a crime is committed? Of course not. That's not how it worked. That's the new version of your rights. The new version of your rights ignores your rights. When a crime is committed against you now, you have to beg law enforcement. You have to beg a prosecutor to take action. And guess what? If the crime has been committed by a government agent, they will do nothing. Our government has admitted, and if you want to look at this, by the way, I write for the Daily Censored right now. That's the blog for Project Censored. It's the premier media reform watchdog organization. It's the Daily Censored. You can go there and you can see the information I'm about to tell you. You can Google why does the U.S. government torture people and find this too. Okay, the U.S. government has admitted that 2 people each day, 2 Americans each day, are beaten to death by law enforcement. 2 Americans each day, beaten to death by law enforcement. Do you hear about that in the news? No. Do those people want some justice for the family members that are beaten to death? Of course they do. Did you hear about the 2 weeks of rioting in Oakland after the law enforcement officers shot Oscar Grant and killed him after he had consented to be in handcuffs and was laying on the ground? 2 weeks of rioting before the local prosecuting prince finally said, hey, we're going to charge this guy. Now, the trial hasn't occurred yet, but unfortunately, in the small instances where they do actually charge someone in government for violating somebody's rights and murdering them, they usually make sure they submarine the prosecution. Like Martin Anderson, when he was beaten to death in Florida. They submarined the prosecution. They put on a medical examiner that had a ludicrous story about the cause of death, saying he died from sickle cell trait. Okay? He was beaten for 30 minutes, but that's not what killed him. It was sickle cell trait. Well, that's ludicrous. That is ludicrous. But the prosecutor put that ludicrous testimony on, and as a result, all those guards that killed that boy got away. They didn't see jail time. And that's because part of the right to petition for redress of grievances was that once you had an indictment from a grand jury, you had the option of prosecuting the criminal. Or you could hire an attorney to prosecute the criminal. Or then, if you couldn't afford to get an attorney and you couldn't do it yourself, then the public prosecutor was supposed to help you. Well, that's changed. And now the public prosecutor stands as a gatekeeper, keeping those who are harmed by those with power from ever seeking redress. Now, If you Google that, you'll also find out, once again, if you Google why does the U.S. government torture people, you'll find other horrible things our government has admitted to, which I'm going to go ahead and throw it out here. It admitted to 130 Americans are raped every day in government custody. 130 every day raped in government custody. That's what they admit to. And they say in there, and Congress admitted to this, these are congressional findings. They say in there that does not include strip searches. If you look at the Fourth Amendment, you'll see that to search somebody's person, you have to have a warrant submitted by somebody in law enforcement to a judge showing probable cause that that person needs to be searched. So all the strip searches that are done actually unconstitutionally. And in fact, right here locally, a few years ago, the state attorney's daughter was picked up on Flagler Beach on a typical abuse of power charge by law enforcement. They claimed she was disorderly and arrested her. And then they took her down to the jail and they said, "We want to strip search it." And she said, "My dad's the state attorney. Why don't you call him?" You got to be kidding me. So she didn't consent. So then they choked her until she passed out, and then they strip searched her. Okay, that was right here in this town. So if anyone's hearing this on the internet and they think, "Hey, I'm in law enforcement, I'm in government, I've got big bucks, it's not going to happen in my family," you're wrong. All they have to do is run across the wrong cop who will make up a story and arrest them. And if they're young and pretty, they're going to get strip searched, folks. Do you want to put your daughters through that? Or do you want to stand up and say, "I want my rights to control my government. I want the right to make sure my votes are counted, and I want the right to go into a grand jury and say this crime was committed and I want some redress." Act now. Otherwise, if you don't, we will not even be able to sit here and speak to 100 people 10 years from now. Thank you very much.
Excellent.